Welcome back to the panel discussion, Women Leading the Way in Government Cybersecurity, sponsored by Raytheon on Federal News Radio, part of the Federal News Network. My guests today are Theresa Shea, Vice President of Cyber Offense and Defense Experts at Raytheon; Alexis Wales, Deputy Associate Director, Threat Hunting, Cybersecurity and Infrastructure, Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency; Karen Evans, the Assistant Secretary for the Office of Cybersecurity, Energy Security and Emergency Response at the Department of Energy; Amelie Caron, Deputy Chief Information Officer, Office of the Inspector General at the Department of Health and Human Services; and Colonel Darcy St. Amant, Military Deputy Operations Center, Defense Information Systems Agency. The concept of this panel today is every side of cyber. I want to talk to you about the contractor side. Give us some insight about the role of the contractor, the Raytheon side of things, and how companies like Raytheon, how you support the diverse needs of all of the federal agencies that you're involved with.
So I would start by saying the primary concern of our customers is both speed and scale. Speed to get capability into operations much more quickly than we're able to do today. And the scale, as we talked about earlier with the interconnectivity of devices, the playing field keeps growing. What we've done at Raytheon, though, is we have taken a transformation in our cyber business to try and work more closely in partnership with some of the, for example, startup technology companies, because they do move much quicker to solutions than we could perhaps build it ourselves. So partnering with them to get speed of technology into capability enables us to provide solutions. And then what we as a defense industrial base really bring to the game is the scale. We know how to scale, we know how to grow, and the combination of those two helps to get solutions that not only can be differentiators, but can also scale. It's hard. The fact that you're working with you're bringing together the defense industrial base with the startup community, with the government, which also is a big player in here, and trying to figure out how do they do acquisition to bring these diverse players together is a challenge.
And to follow up on that, I guess I want to ask about internally at Raytheon itself, being in the business of securing government assets. How does Raytheon take similar measures to secure Raytheon's cyber exposure? And what and should the government expect of companies performing cyber tasks for the nation when it comes to how they secure their own companies?
Yes, I think they should expect no less than what they expect of themselves and all of us. This is not none of us are on islands, and we're all increasingly interconnected. So your defense is as important as anybody else's defense. So the expectation is there, and Raytheon takes this very seriously, not just with applying commercial capability to defend their internal networks, but internal capability to defend their networks. And again, we talked about data before, but constantly having that situational understanding of your network, looking at the data and ensuring that you know what's happening on your network in real time, and knowing what your most important digital assets are, whether they're government assets or whether they're intellectual property. Those have to be a priority in getting protected.
And those are, do you think, the biggest vulnerabilities in the private sector?
I think that the bar to entry from attackers is low. And once they get in, they discover what might be valuable to them, what they might be able to sell, what they might be able to use to their advantage. Even personal identifiable information can be of high value to an adversary. And so you again, I go back to the know what's the most important asset to you, protect that, but you also have to protect your entire network surface.
Darcy, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about your very unique position, having been the only one on this panel who's actually been out in the field, deployed overseas. Talk a little bit about threat assessment in the field and the challenges of securing the mission, perhaps in areas of conflict, your strategy.
Okay. Yeah, so the Defense Information Systems Agency is a combat support agency that supports our warfighters globally, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. We always are on. And so how we do that is with our forward positioned field offices that are co-located with our combatant commands in every part of the globe. And so what that allows us to do is understand their operational requirements, their operational threats that are specific to that region, as well as some of the transnational threats. And more importantly, to understand the impact of that on their specific mission so that we can partner with them to help mitigate that. So to echo Theresa's point earlier, I think it's very important from a strategic perspective to assume breach at every level, from the endpoint to the cloud, and build a strategy that addresses that in a holistic manner.
And when you say a holistic manner, what do you mean by that?
So we have a lot of times focused on technologies or particular programs, and what's really important is not just that single technology, but how those multiple technologies are integrated and configured to protect against a hostile network or environment.
It's so interesting to me because I wonder what you all see as the difference between protecting the homeland out in the field versus doing it here on the home turf. Alexis, can you talk to that a little bit?
From a Department of Homeland Security perspective, we partner very closely with our international partners. So we take Homeland Security and defense of the homeland with the utmost concern and focus level. However, we are also aware that there is a need for overseas support as well. And you will find that Homeland Security, while its primary focuses are, of course, domestic critical infrastructure protection, federal network security, and providing support to state and local governments, we are also aware of the need to partner with the international community to ensure that they have the same information, equivalent information to what we have, and they are part of our international watch and warning system that allows for us to better provide domestic support.
I want to ask each of you what you consider a success. Amelie, is it if a cyber attack has been thwarted, or is it that you recognize a potential attack in the planning stages before it happens? That sort of harkens back to our reactive versus proactive approach. I'd like you to address that.
Yeah, actually, one of the things was when I first started my security career, the key point for us was to make sure that our organization wasn't on the front page of the Washington Post. That's a good ethos to kind of run by. But generally, one of those cases with, trying to predict an attack, it requires lots of intelligence. The defense and the intelligence community is really good at collecting that. And it kind of scales down further from there unless you have, a counterintel capability, both at the physical and cyber level, to be able to at least understand what your threats are. But for us, one of the panelists before was talking about the mixed environment that we operate in. We within HHS overall, we have NIH that does a lot of research, so that's actually intellectual property, but also dealing with data regarding protected health information of patients and people in studies. But conversely, we also support eradication of diseases like Ebola. So the CDC having to operate in a very, I would assume, a hot zone, as the DoD would put it. But it's very hard to predict those because it's always a constant moving landscape of both attackers as well as what they could potentially be after. So for us, as HHS as a whole, is the speed to basically be able to adapt to those. But coming from private industry and then coming in the government, I've never been very good at predicting things. It's always been reactive, and just knowing that you have a playbook or a capability to respond to a discovered threat or a breach or anything like that, the attempt to minimize it or recover from it is just as valuable as trying to predict it.
Karen?
So we are trying to move the paradigm the way that you're describing it, and if I use the NIST framework, which I will, it's the model of detect and protect, because most of our partners are international, right? So we have a physical footprint here, but they're international. So, and we do have intelligence component within the Department of Energy. So it is to move the paradigm and change the paradigm so that we're not analyzing after the fact, but that we can detect ahead of time. So we are taking the premise zero trust, right? That they're already in. I mean, it's pretty evident, not that I have this memorized, but on the bottom of page 5, on the Worldwide Threat Assessment, it talks specifically about what China can do in our infrastructure, and on the top of page 6, it talks very specifically about what Russia can do in our infrastructure. So what we're trying to do is make sure we can detect it. So some of the traditional ways of how people look at the information is very after the fact of something happening. So that's the reactive piece. So we're pretty much now saying that any anomaly, any alarm that's triggered within an operational technology environment, that is the trigger. That is the cyber threat indicator until such time that we can do the analysis across the board and say that it's not, that that's a normal way. And the only way that's going to happen is if our asset owners are the ones who can tell us, but we have to give them that information, and it has to be informed by threat intelligence. So it looks like something, and it could be something normal, but we're giving them information saying, hey, you need to look here because it looks unusual and it maps back to some of these other infrastructures that we've seen.
Pages 5 and 6 are interesting.
Exactly.
China and Russia.
Exactly.
Are those the biggest threats that you see?
Well, I mean, it's very specific in there about their mapping out our infrastructure and what they intend to do and their capabilities. And the D&I released that so that our industry partners, like, it's not classified. This is all open source, so that we can then start looking at strategically of, you know, how are we going to share that? How are we going to get into a more proactive position? You know, what is necessary? What barriers, what information sharing do we need to do? What do our industry partner solutions offer? So when we start looking at this, like we're doing, when you talk about contractors being involved, like everybody's running over into the energy space because they all read the same report too. And then you're looking at, well, do those capabilities really help out the utility owners and the energy sector as a whole? Well, that's where we're doing the analysis. So it gets into supply chain. Is this commercial service? Can it really do what it says it can do? And it's all about, like, let's not deploy another sensor, but let's get the information in so we can analyze it, because everything is a sensor today. I mean, everything can send information. My refrigerator can send information if I wanted to.
Right. When is it that you recognize a potential threat in the planning stages? Is it something that you see right away, often? Is it, how often, I guess, is the question.
So we work very closely with those that are mapping the attack life cycle so that we can be aware and develop detection techniques and methodologies that can identify where an adversary may be, different steps of that life cycle itself. We weight heavily the activities and detections that we find that are closer to boom, and ensure that we're stopping as best we possibly can with the owner of the asset prior to an actual consequence or effect taking place. This is an area where information sharing, detection technique sharing, methodology sharing, understanding of the attack life cycle, all of these things are important for whether it's contractor or federal space or other partners are on the same page about. It allows for us to take action in ways that fit the greater enterprise model that we're seeking to do and to ensure the greatest impact of prevention or detection up front.
I wanted to ask you about the cost of protection, because it's expensive, obviously, to implement all the tools that are needed for a robust cybersecurity program. You need funding for the purchase of the program and the licensing fees, and it can cost a lot of money. I'm wondering if your agencies, how you deal with that sort of budgeting aspect of it and securing the funding that's needed, does it stress you out? Do you feel like you're funded to the point where you can have what you need from your various suppliers?
So we're a new office, so I'm very heavily involved in budgeting. The office was started by the secretary based on the critical need, right? And he's very concerned about the time that we would be exploited the most is when we're responding to a natural disaster. So that's why he formed the office. So it's a brand new office. So based on that, like, we have to say, okay, here's the resources, but we also have to construct a business model that shows where private industry is investing and what is the right role for government, so that we can say these are the types of technologies or types of research and development that we're doing that maybe private industry should not be funding, right? So that we could test it out. So there's this fine line between what is government's appropriate role, and the other piece is our program is being constructed in a way that it is threat informed. So intelligence, that's the uniqueness that government brings, is the intelligence aspect. So then how do you develop solutions that are market based that then can get to the broadest audience that hits then a reduced cost because, you know, they have shareholders or they're a utility or they have a, you know, all the models, the rates, like you get your electric bill, you don't want it to go up because this major cybersecurity solution is going in place. They have to be able to explain that.
I'm your moderator, Deborah Feinstein, on the panel discussion, Women Leading the Way in Government Cybersecurity, sponsored by Raytheon on Federal News Radio, part of the Federal News Network.